So more often than not, the base models are the middle children of the tech world. You know the running joke about how in a family, the middle child usually gets overlooked while the first or even the last siblings get all the attention. I would know because I'm a middle child myself. So we get caught up in the pros and the ultras and all their flashy specs, which is understandable. You want to see if the premium offerings live up to all the hype, but I also try to not exclude the entry-level devices. I like to cover all the bases. So today we're going to be putting the spotlight on the base model Pixel 10 and the Galaxy S25 to see what you actually get for your money and what each one does right or doesn't. Okay, right off the bat, we have two pretty similar looking devices, same rectangular frame, same rounded corners, same flat display. And there's not much difference between the dimensions and the build quality of the Pixel 10 and the Pixel 9, and that has been a major talking point in all of the reviews that I have seen. Now, I'm all for novelty and improvement, but it is an understandable choice. The Pixel 9 was a widely loved design, so I guess Google didn't really want to fix what wasn't broken. It has Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the front and on the back, matte aluminum frames on the sides, and on the back panel a nice glossy finish. I really like the matte sides. They make for better grip and of course make the phone smudge proof in that area. It is a different story for the back though, which is just a fingerprint magnet. I personally prefer the S25's fully matte finish because it's a lot cleaner to handle. And speaking of, Samsung also repeated many of the design choices from last year, same everything really. The only difference being that it's just slightly thinner. However, the Pixel 10 is even heavier at 204 grams, which makes the S25 feel lighter in comparison to the 162 grams. On paper, that's a big gap, but in my hand, it's noticeable, but it's not really a deal breaker. Now on the back, the Pixel gets the signature horizontal camera design, but is slightly larger this year to accommodate the new telephoto camera, which I'll talk about very soon. Now the S25 is keeping that minimalist design from last year as well, just 3 vertical camera rings. You get the SIM card tray on the bottom of the S25, Type-C charging ports, volume buttons on the right, pretty standard stuff that we all expect. And this is where the first major difference is between these two phones. Pixel 10 only gets an eSIM for the US market, so there's no SIM card tray in sight. I think this could be a deal breaker depending on what you need from your phone. If you just stick to one SIM card, I think that's fine. It shouldn't be a problem. But if you're just like me and you always swap phones or you like to travel a lot, it's just an extra step and possibly having to contact your carrier every single time you want to set up a phone, which is very frustrating, especially because it doesn't translate to any benefits for the design. If you remove the SIM card tray, you should then be able to offer a slimmer design. But like I said, the Pixel is still bulky as ever, so that's something to note. Anyway, we do get some cool new colors this year. You have Obsidian, Frost, Lemongrass, and Indigo, which I'm hearing is a callback to the really blue colorway on the OG Pixel. There's also the theory that Google did it to make the Pixel look similar to the ultramarine on the iPhone 16, and to be honest, I wouldn't really put it past them. And like I always say, design is very subjective, and when I look at both phones side by side, I will go with the Pixel 10 because it just has that distinctive camera design and of course the better colors. Now when it comes to the display, I say that there's no clear winner between the Pixel 10 and the S25. Nothing here is a make or break factor per se. So the Pixel 10 has a 6.3-inch OLED screen with an adjustable refresh rate of a 60 to 120 Hz and 3000 nits of peak brightness, which is a step up from last year's 2700 nits. Now the S25 is slightly smaller on paper at 6.2 inches, but also rocking a 120 Hz refresh rate, a dynamic AMOLED screen, and 2600 nits of peak brightness. Both of them have responsive ultrasonic fingerprint readers built into the screen, so getting into your phone is seamless either way. Now, the reason I said that there's no clear winner in this category is that there are little nuances that sort of level the playing field here and there. One is, even though the Pixel is slightly larger, the S25 has thinner bezels on the display. It's about 91.1 screen to body ratio compared to the 86.1 screen to body ratio on the Pixel. Resolution is around 1080 by 2424 on the Pixel 10 and 1080 by 2340 on the S25. So technically, the Pixel has a touch more vertical pixels, but it's not the sort of thing that you will notice in your day-to-day use. Side by side, they're going to look evenly large to most people. You're only going to pick them up and say, oh wow, this is bigger than the other. The main difference you notice is in the bezels and the proportions, not in the actual screen real estate. And number two, Only the S25 has the LTPO tech, which means the display is smart enough to throttle down when it doesn't need all that horsepower. Like when you're just reading a text or staring at a static image, it can drop all the way from 120Hz to 1Hz. The Pixel 10 only goes as low as 60Hz, which means it doesn't do the battery management as well as the S25 does. So the first thing you want to do when you get your Pixel is head into your settings and toggle on your smooth display. Otherwise, you're not even seeing what the screen can really do. And speaking of battery management, the S25 comes in at 4,000 mAh of battery, which I've complained about in the past, and I will complain about it again. This is behind the curve of flagship phones in 2025, so I guess it's a plus that it has an LTPO panel to help conserve what is already a relatively small battery. Now, I've used the S25 for a longer period, so I can confidently say that it delivers around 7 to 8 hours of screen on time, which is pretty good. But it's not exactly the most exciting thing. Now, the Pixel 10, on the other hand, is almost 1,000 mAh of battery, and that is around 4,970. That's a healthy bump from last year's 4,700 on the Pixel 9. However, it is very soon to tell. But if I'm going with what I already know, I think the S25 will give you the better battery in the long term. And charging is where Samsung really does drop the ball. The S25 is frustratingly slow for a flagship phone. It's almost embarrassing. Now, Samsung has no improvements since the S23, so the S25 will still charge around 25 watts and takes about 1 hour 15 minutes to go from 0 to 100%. The Pixel does a little better at 27 watts, so it does do 55% in 30 minutes with a 30-watt charger, which is only passable because it's topping up a bigger battery. And compared to other flagship phones, both of these are crawling behind. Samsung and Google need to get it together very, very soon. But the Pixel wins some points when it comes to the Qi2 wireless charging. At least it is native. Now let's talk about the software and the performance. And a quick plug before we get into it, we are so close to 40,000 subs, and it'll be really dope if we can get there in good time. So if you're watching and you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time to do so. So hit the subscribe button. It'll actually help me more than you think. Now the Pixel 10 and the S25 are both snappy. No doubt about it, but they get there in slightly different ways. Pixel 10 runs on Google's highly talked about Tensor G5 on Android 16, and honestly, it is silky smooth for everyday stuff. Scrolling, switching apps, watching YouTube, all that good stuff. And the S25 has the Snapdragon 8 Elite, which is beefier on paper and definitely pulls ahead in heavy games or rendering. On the S25, you get 512 gigs of storage, but the Pixel caps at 256. You also get 12 gigs of RAM on both phones, 128 gigs of base storage, as well as 7 years of software and security updates. It's kind of a big deal for the S25 to have 12 gigs because the base model used to only get 8, but it does contribute to how fast the phone is in your day-to-day use. But if you push it too hard for too long, say gaming or video editing, it starts to throttle. So if you're planning on that kind of endurance play, you might want the Ultra or maybe even the OnePlus 13. So if you're looking at the base 128 gig on the Pixel 10, just know that Google cheaped out in this department because every Pixel device with 128 gigs gets UFS 3.1 instead of UFS 4.0. Now, UFS, Universal Flash Storage, is the storage tech that makes opening apps, saving videos, and moving files faster and more efficient. So the base model still works fine, but compared to the larger storage options, you might see slightly slower performance and a less battery efficiency. And why Google did this, I have no idea. But yeah, that's something to note. Now the S25 gets UFS 4.0 on all storage options, so that's a plus. And I'm not going to bury you in all the benchmark scores in this review because I don't think they always translate into real world experience or implications. But at this point, it is common knowledge that the Pixels are not made for editing 4K video on your device or playing games like Genshin Impact all day. So the Pixel 10 is also not the phone to get if that is what you're looking for. Now what they are great at is seamless device experience, and the Tensor G5 delivers that smooth experience, especially with the new AI features running locally on your device. And there are already AI features that we're used to, like circle to search, best take, and add me. They now added things like magic queue and live voice translation, which both have the potential for real world application if they end up working as well as the demo anyway. It's just Google finally using their powers for good. And now the S25 runs on One UI 7 on Android 15. I've personally never been a huge fan of One UI, but this version has converted me in that regard. It's polished, it's smooth, and has a bunch of useful AI features as well. The Pixel 10 still has the edge with Android 16, which gives it slightly better efficiency out of the box, but it's only a matter of time before the rest of the Android world gets that update. And I think when it comes to raw performance, the S25 definitely wins. The Pixel pulls ahead if we're comparing software performance, especially if you're plugged into that Google ecosystem and you can take advantage of the AI integration. So let's get into what is probably the most controversial upgrade on the Pixel 10, and that is the camera. So the big change this year is that the base Pixel finally gets a third camera. You're getting a 48 megapixel main camera, a 30 megapixel ultra wide lens, and a 10.8 5x telephoto lens. It's a similar setup to what is on the Pixel Fold, and it means you can finally zoom without depending on a digital crop. Now, fair warning, the main and the ultra wide are technically a step down from the Pro models and even from last year's Pixel 9. The regular Pixel 10 maxes out at 20x zoom, but honestly, unless you're really trying to spy on your neighbors from across the streets, I think 20x is just fine. Day to day, the Pixel 10 still delivers the classic Pixel results, great dynamic range, balanced detail and colors that lean more into a natural look than artificial, which has less saturation. With portraits, the edge detection is slightly better and the bokeh is a lot smoother. Now the zoom is still overprocessed sometimes, but that's been a Pixel thing for a very long time. For video, you get 4K at 60 frames per second, 240 frames per second for slow-mo, and 10 bits HDR and optical stabilization, all pretty solid for a base model. On the Samsung side of life, the S25 sticks with a 50 megapixel wide-angle lens, a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens, and a 10 megapixel telephoto lens with up to 30x digital zoom. Like the Pixel, there's also some AI features that help with cleaning up the pictures, and it doesn't do too shabby, if I'm being honest. Now, if you've been following this channel for a while, you know that I'm not a big fan of Samsung's processing. There's usually too much saturation going on, and it's not flattering for darker skin tones. So where Samsung edges out the Pixel is in its video. This has an 8K recording at up to 240 frames per second, and their ultra steady mode makes it a better choice if you're really big on filming. So with everything that we just talked about, which of these phones should you get? Now the Google Pixel 10 is $799, and that is the same as the S25. However, with some trading deals, you can get it down to $699, and that is a $100 difference. And both brands save their biggest upgrades for the Pro models. You have a higher res screen, faster charging, better performance, and so on and so forth. But I lean towards the Pixel because it just feels like the complete phone even without those extra features. You're still getting the core experience, the software, the cameras, and the hardware design, just without the premium price tag. And if the base saves you a chunk of cash and still nails the everyday stuff, then that's a win in my books. And the S25 wins based on raw performance, but it feels like a teaser for the S25 Ultra, and that's why for me, the Pixel is the better value. But hey, that's just my take, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you guys think, or what do you think is the better phone, the S25 or the Pixel 10? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, thank you guys for watching this video. Hit the subscribe button, like this video, as this is the best way to help me out. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.